Sarah Martinez had always been small for her age, but what she lacked in size, she made up for in determination. At 22, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with calloused hands from years of farm work and eyes that burned with an intensity that made people uncomfortable. Growing up on her family's ranch in rural Texas, she had learned to shoot before she could properly tie her shoes. Her father, a former Marine, had taught her that precision mattered more than power, and that patience was a shooter's greatest weapon. The day Sarah walked through the gates of Naval Special Warfare Command in San Diego, whispers followed her like shadows. She wore her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her uniform crisp and spotless, but nothing could hide the fact that she was different. In a world dominated by towering men with thick necks and broader shoulders than most doorways, she looked like a child playing dress-up. Colonel James Morrison was conducting his morning inspection when he first laid eyes on Sarah. Morrison was a legend in special operations circles, a man whose reputation had been forged in the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Iraq. He had seen countless recruits come and go, had watched tough men break under pressure, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot weakness from across a parade ground. When Morrison's gaze fell on Sarah, his weathered face twisted into what could generously be called a smile. The other recruits straightened their backs and held their breath, knowing that look meant trouble for someone. Morrison approached slowly, his boots clicking against the concrete with military precision. "Well, well," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform. "What do we have here?" He stopped directly in front of Sarah, towering over her like a mountain over a pebble. Did someone's little sister get lost on her way to cheerleading practice? The other recruits struggled to contain their snickers. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set in a hard line. She had heard variations of this joke her entire life, but coming from a decorated colonel in front of her peers stung in a way she hadn't expected. Morrison circled her like a predator sizing up prey. "Martinez, isn't it? From some backwater ranch in Texas?" He paused, consulting his clipboard with theatrical interest. "Says here you think you can be a sniper." "That's adorable." The word dripped with condescension. "Sir, yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Morrison laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the buildings around them. "Listen, sweetheart, I've been training snipers since before you were born. The men I train go on to make impossible shots in impossible conditions. They carry 100-pound packs through enemy territory and sleep in mud for weeks at a time. They're warriors." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than shouting. "You look like a strong wind would blow you back to whatever farm you crawled off of." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Sarah could feel the eyes of every recruit, every instructor, every passing officer focused on this moment. This was her chance to prove herself, or to slink away with her tail between her legs like so many others had before her. Instead of backing down, Sarah did something unexpected. She smiled. "Sir, with respect, my grandfather always told me that the loudest dog in the pack is usually the most worried about getting bit," Sarah said, her Texas drawl becoming more pronounced under stress. "I didn't come here to look pretty or to prove I belong. I came here to be the best sniper in the United States Navy, and I intend to do exactly that." Morrison's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared under his cap. In 30 years of military service, few recruits had ever dared to speak to him with such directness. Most would have wilted under his verbal assault, offering apologies and excuses. This little farm girl had just thrown down a gauntlet. "Is that so?" Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. "Well, Miss Martinez, since you're so confident in your abilities, perhaps we should put them to the test. Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours, you'll report to the rifle range. We'll see just how good this little cowgirl really is." As Morrison walked away, the other recruits began to whisper among themselves. Some looked at Sarah with newfound respect, others with pity. They all knew that Morrison's morning challenges were legendary, designed to humble recruits who thought too highly of themselves. Most who faced his personal attention washed out within days. Sarah spent the rest of the day going through routine processing, filling out paperwork, and receiving her gear assignments. But her mind was already on tomorrow morning, visualizing the range, thinking about wind patterns and breathing techniques. She had been underestimated her entire life, and while it stung, she had learned to use it as fuel. That evening, as she lay in her narrow bunk in the temporary housing facility, Sarah thought about her father. He had died 2 years earlier in a farming accident, but not before making her promise to chase her dreams no matter how impossible they seemed. "The world's going to try to tell you what you can't do based on what you look like," he had said during one of their last conversations. "Don't you listen. You show them what you're made of." Tomorrow would be her first real chance to honor that promise. The alarm clock seemed to ring earlier than usual, though Sarah had been awake for an hour already. She dressed quietly, not wanting to wake her bunkmates, and made her way through the pre-dawn darkness to the rifle range. The California air was crisp and still, perfect conditions for shooting. Morrison was already there when she arrived, standing next to a table laden with various weapons. He looked like he had been awake for hours, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. Next to him stood Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the head marksmanship instructor, whose reputation for turning ordinary soldiers into deadly accurate shooters was known throughout the special operations community. "Right on time," Morrison said, glancing at his watch. "I do appreciate punctuality." He gestured toward the weapons. "Today's test is simple. We start at 100 yards, work our way back to 1,000. You'll have 3 shots at each distance. Miss more than 2 targets total. And you can pack your bags." Sarah nodded, stepping up to examine the rifle Morrison indicated. It was a standard military sniper rifle, nothing fancy, but well-maintained and familiar. She had trained on similar weapons countless times with her father, and later during her brief stint in community college ROTC. "Oh, and Martinez," Morrison added with a cruel smile. "Just to make things interesting, you won't be shooting alone. Sergeant Rodriguez here will be demonstrating proper technique alongside you. He holds the current base record for accuracy at distance. Should give you something to aspire to." Rodriguez nodded politely at Sarah, his expression neutral. Unlike Morrison, he seemed content to let her shooting speak for itself. He had seen too many surprises over the years to judge anyone before they proved themselves one way or another. The first target, at 100 yards, was almost insultingly easy. Sarah settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth motion she had practiced 10,000 times on her family's ranch. The bullet struck dead center. Her second and third shots landed so close to the first that the holes overlapped. Rodriguez's shots were equally precise, grouped tightly in the center ring. Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral, though Sarah caught a flicker of something that might have been surprise. "Beginner's luck," Morrison muttered as they moved to the 200-yard line. At 200 yards, Sarah's grouping tightened even further. Each shot landed within a space smaller than a quarter, clustering around the exact center of the target. Rodriguez's shooting remained flawless, but Sarah noticed that his grouping was slightly larger than hers. By the time they reached 500 yards, a small crowd had begun to gather. Word had spread through the base that Morrison was personally testing the new female recruit, and curiosity had drawn instructors and advanced students to watch. At this distance, environmental factors began to play a larger role. Wind, humidity, and even the Earth's rotation could affect a bullet's path. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle breeze on her face, calculating its effect on her shot. When she fired, the bullet struck the target's center ring. Her second shot landed so close to the first that it actually touched the previous hole. Her third shot completed a triangle that could be covered by a nickel. The murmur from the watching crowd grew louder. Rodriguez's grouping was excellent, textbook perfect, but noticeably larger than Sarah's. For the first time since the test began, Morrison's poker face slipped. He stared at the targets through his binoculars with an expression of genuine puzzlement. "Lucky streak," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The 800-yard line marked the beginning of serious long-range shooting. At this distance, the target appeared as little more than a speck through the scope, and even experienced marksmen could struggle to maintain accuracy. The wind had picked up slightly, creating cross-currents that would challenge any shooter's ability to compensate. Sarah took her time preparing for the shot, studying the grass between her position and the target, watching how it bent and swayed in the breeze. Her father had taught her to read wind patterns like other people read books, understanding that nature always provided the information a patient observer needed. When she fired, the crack of the rifle seemed to echo longer than before. Through the spotting scope, Rodriguez watched as the bullet struck within inches of the target's center. Sarah's second shot landed even closer, and her third created a grouping that defied what most of the observers thought possible at such a range. The crowd had grown larger now, and the whispers had turned into open conversations. Senior instructors who had seen thousands of recruits over the years exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars and looked at Sarah with undisguised respect. "Outstanding shooting," he said quietly. "Where did you train?" "Mostly at home, sir," Sarah replied, checking her rifle's scope adjustments. "My father was a Marine Scout sniper in the Gulf War. He taught me everything he knew." Morrison overheard the exchange, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He had built his reputation on being the toughest, most demanding instructor in the special operations community. Recruits were supposed to struggle under his guidance, to earn their skills through blood, sweat, and countless hours of practice. They weren't supposed to arrive already possessing abilities that surpassed his own standards. "The 1,000-yard line," Morrison announced loudly, his voice carrying across the range. "This is where we separate the pretenders from the professionals." 1,000 yards was more than half a mile, a distance where even atmospheric pressure could affect a bullet's trajectory. At this range, the target appeared microscopic through the scope, and factors invisible to the naked eye could mean the difference between a perfect shot and a complete miss. Sarah had never shot at quite this distance before. Her family's ranch, while large, didn't offer the space for 1,000-yard shooting. But she had studied the theory extensively, had calculated the mathematics in her head during countless sleepless nights, and had dreamed of the opportunity to test herself at such extreme range. The wind had become more complex, swirling in patterns that required constant adjustment. Sarah spent several minutes simply observing, watching dust particles and grass movement, building a mental map of the air currents between her and the target. The crowd behind her had fallen completely silent, understanding that they were witnessing something special. When Sarah finally settled into her shooting position, her movements were deliberate and precise. She controlled her breathing until her heart rate slowed to its normal resting pace, feeling the rhythm of her pulse through the rifle's stock. The crosshairs in her scope danced slightly with each heartbeat, and she timed her shot to fall between beats. The rifle's report seemed to hang in the air forever. For several seconds, nobody moved or spoke, waiting for confirmation from the target pit. When the red flag was raised, indicating a hit, the silence exploded into amazed chatter. Sarah's first shot at 1,000 yards had landed in the target's second ring, an achievement that would have been impressive for an experienced sniper. Her second shot moved closer to center, and her third landed squarely in the bullseye. Rodriguez had also shot well, his grouping tight and professional, but even his years of experience couldn't match what they had just witnessed. Morrison stood frozen, his binoculars still pressed to his eyes, staring at targets that seemed to mock everything he thought he knew about marksmanship training. "Impossible," Morrison muttered, finally lowering his binoculars. "Nobody shoots like that on their first day. Nobody." Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, the senior enlisted advisor for the sniper program, had arrived during the 1,000-yard shooting. He was a man whose opinion carried tremendous weight, someone who had seen the best snipers in the world and had trained many of them personally. "Colonel Morrison," Williams said, his voice carefully neutral, "I've been watching the last few strings of fire. That young woman just shot a score that would qualify her for advanced sniper school right now, today, without any additional training." Morrison turned to face Williams, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "It's a fluke, Master Chief. Lucky shots. Give her a week of real training, real pressure, and she'll fold like a house of cards." Williams studied Morrison for a moment before responding. "Sir, with respect, that wasn't luck. That was pure skill. I've never seen shooting like that from a recruit, and I've been doing this for 22 years. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Jennifer Hayes, the commanding officer of the training facility. Hayes was a former helicopter pilot who had transferred to Special Operations Administration after a combat injury ended her flying career. She was known for her fairness, her intelligence, and her complete intolerance for discrimination in any form. "Gentlemen," Hayes said as she approached the group, "I've been hearing some interesting reports from the rifle range this morning. Colonel Morrison, I understand you've been conducting a special evaluation?" Morrison straightened to attention. "Yes, ma'am. Testing a new recruit's claims about her marksmanship abilities." Hayes walked over to examine the targets that had been brought back from the various distances. She studied each one carefully, her expression growing more impressed with each passing moment. When she reached the 1,000-yard target, she whistled softly under her breath. "Colonel, these scores are remarkable. What's the recruit's background?" "Farm girl from Texas, ma'am," Morrison replied, his tone dismissive. "Claims her father taught her to shoot." Hayes looked up sharply. "Martinez? Her file came across my desk yesterday. Her father was Gunnery Sergeant Robert Martinez, killed in action in Fallujah. He was one of the finest scout snipers the Corps ever produced." She paused, letting that information sink in. Apparently, he passed along more than just basic marksmanship skills. The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. Robert Martinez was a legend in special operations circles, a man whose confirmed kills and impossible shots had become the stuff of military folklore. If this girl was his daughter, trained by him personally, then everything Morrison thought he knew about the situation had just changed. Sarah, meanwhile, had been quietly cleaning her rifle and organizing her gear. She had heard every word of the conversation behind her, but chose not to react. Her father had taught her that actions spoke louder than words, and that the best response to doubters was continued excellence. "Martinez!" Captain Hayes called out. "Front and center." Sarah approached and came to attention. "Yes, ma'am." "Outstanding shooting today, recruit. I want you to report to Master Chief Williams tomorrow morning at 0600 hours. You're being moved directly into the advanced marksmanship program." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the excitement building in her chest. Hayes turned back to Morrison. "Colonel, I want to see you in my office at 1400 hours. We need to discuss training protocols and proper evaluation procedures." As the crowd began to disperse, Morrison found himself standing alone with his thoughts and his wounded pride. For 30 years, he had been the standard by which military marksmanship was measured. Today, a 22-year-old farm girl had shown up and made his expertise look ordinary. Sarah walked back to her barracks, her rifle case slung over her shoulder and her head held high. Behind her, she could hear the excited conversations of the other recruits and instructors, discussing what they had witnessed. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, harder tests, and even more skeptical observers. But she also knew something else. She had honored her father's memory and kept her promise. More importantly, she had proved to herself that she belonged here, that her dreams weren't just fantasy, but achievable goals. The real test, however, was just beginning. Advanced sniper training would push her beyond anything she had experienced, testing not just her marksmanship, but her physical endurance, mental toughness, and ability to perform under pressure that could break even the strongest candidates. As she lay in her bunk that night, Sarah thought about the targets she had hit and the ones that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new mountains to climb, new records to chase, and new skeptics to convince. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had faced down a colonel's mockery and emerged victorious. Now it was time to see just how far her father's teachings could take her. 6 weeks into advanced sniper training, Sarah had become something of a legend among the instructors and students at the Naval Special Warfare Command. Every morning brought new challenges designed to test the limits of human precision and endurance, and every morning, Sarah met those challenges with a quiet determination that left even seasoned veterans shaking their heads in amazement. Master Chief Williams had taken personal responsibility for her training, pushing her through exercises that had broken stronger, more experienced candidates. Moving target scenarios, extreme weather conditions, limited visibility shoots, and stress fire exercises that would have challenged a Navy SEAL with years of combat experience. Sarah absorbed every lesson, mastered every technique, and consistently performed at levels that defied conventional wisdom about training progression. The morning Colonel Morrison had been dreading finally arrived when Captain Hayes called him to her office for their regular training review meeting. On her desk lay a stack of performance reports, qualification scores, and evaluation forms that told a story Morrison wished he could rewrite. "Colonel," Captain Hayes began without preamble, "we need to discuss Recruit Martinez's progress through the advanced program." Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ma'am, I understand she's been performing adequately." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Adequately? Colonel, this young woman has broken 7 base records in the past 6 weeks. 7. Records that have stood for years, set by some of our most elite snipers." She picked up a folder and began reading. "Longest confirmed accuracy shot during training. Best score under simulated combat stress. Fastest target acquisition and engagement. Most consecutive hits at variable distances. Best performance in adverse weather conditions." She looked up. "Should I continue?" Morrison's jaw worked silently. Each record Hayes mentioned was one he had either set himself or had trained the person who set it. Watching them fall one by one to a recruit he had dismissed as a farm girl was professionally humiliating and personally devastating. "There's something else," Hayes continued. "The Navy SEAL Command has been watching her progress. They want to offer her a chance to attempt their sniper qualification course. If she passes, she would be the first woman to do so." The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. The Navy SEAL sniper program represented the absolute pinnacle of military marksmanship. Its qualification standards were so demanding that even experienced special operations snipers sometimes failed on their first attempt. The idea that a recruit with less than 2 months of formal training could be considered for such an opportunity was almost incomprehensible. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Morrison asked. Hayes nodded. "The SEAL sniper program isn't just about shooting accuracy. It's about survival, endurance, mental toughness under extreme conditions, combat situations where lives depend on split-second decisions, and perfect execution." With respect, ma'am, shooting at stationary targets on a comfortable range isn't the same as putting a bullet through an enemy's head at 800 yards while under fire. Hayes studied Morrison carefully. Are you questioning the judgment of SEAL Command, Colonel, or are you questioning whether a woman can handle combat conditions? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Morrison knew he was walking into dangerous territory, but his pride and his prejudices were driving him forward despite his better judgment. Ma'am, I'm questioning whether someone with her limited experience is ready for that level of responsibility. The men she would be serving alongside stake their lives on their sniper's ability to perform under pressure. I'm not sure she's earned that kind of trust yet. Hayes closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Colonel, I'm going to tell you something that might interest you. Yesterday, I received a call from General Patterson at Special Operations Command. He had been following Recruit Martinez's progress through channels we didn't even know were paying attention. According to the General, there are people at the highest levels of the Pentagon who believe this young woman represents the future of Special Operations marksmanship. Morrison felt the walls of his certainty beginning to crumble. General Patterson was a living legend, a man whose opinion carried weight throughout the entire military hierarchy. If Patterson was personally following Sarah's progress, then this situation had moved far beyond a local training evaluation. The general also mentioned something else, Hayes continued. He said that resistance to change, especially when that change challenges long-held assumptions about capability and gender roles, has historically been one of the military's greatest weaknesses. He specifically mentioned that commanders who fail to recognize and nurture exceptional talent, regardless of its packaging, often find their own careers stalled. The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakably clear. Morrison's continued resistance to acknowledging Sarah's abilities could have serious consequences for his own future in the military. Meanwhile, on the advanced training range, Sarah was facing her most challenging test yet. The exercise was called Urban Nightmare, a simulation designed to replicate the conditions special operations snipers might face in a hostile city environment. Multiple targets at varying distances, civilians mixed with combatants, limited time to identify and engage threats, and simulated incoming fire designed to create maximum stress and distraction. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez had positioned himself in the observation post, calling out targets and scenarios through Sarah's headset. 200 meters, building 3, second-floor window. Adult male with weapon, civilian woman, and child to his right. You have 5 seconds to take the shot. Sarah's scope swept across the target building, quickly identifying the threat through her crosshairs. The shot required precision that left no room for error. Accuracy that could mean the difference between saving innocent lives and causing a tragedy. She controlled her breathing, calculated the minimal wind drift at that distance, and squeezed the trigger. The target dropped instantly. Clean hit, center mass, Rodriguez confirmed. Target neutralized, civilians safe. The exercise continued for 45 minutes, presenting scenario after scenario that would challenge even veteran combat snipers. Multiple moving targets, shots through narrow windows, targets partially concealed behind cover, and distance ranging from close quarters to extreme long range. Through it all, Sarah's performance remained flawless, her accuracy unwavering despite the mounting pressure and complexity. When the exercise concluded, Rodriguez removed his headset and stared at the results display with an expression of frank amazement. Martinez, in 15 years of running this course, I've never seen anyone achieve a perfect score. Most Navy SEALs consider passing with 80% acceptable performance. Sarah nodded, her face flushed from exertion but her hands still steady. Thank you, Sergeant. What's next? Rodriguez laughed despite himself. What's next is that you've officially exceeded the qualification standards for Navy SEAL Sniper School. What's next is that you've probably just changed the entire conversation about women in special operations. Word of Sarah's perfect score on the Urban Nightmare exercise spread through the base like wildfire. By evening, her accomplishment had reached the ears of every instructor, every administrator, and every recruit in the program. More importantly, it had reached Colonel Morrison. Morrison spent that evening alone in his office, reviewing Sarah's complete training file. Page after page documented achievements that should have been impossible for someone with her limited experience. Perfect scores on written examinations covering advanced ballistics, weather pattern analysis, and tactical decision-making. Physical fitness test results that surpassed those of candidates 20 pounds heavier and years more experienced. Performance evaluations from instructors who had been teaching advanced marksmanship longer than Sarah had been alive. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Sarah Martinez wasn't just a competent marksman or even an exceptional one. She was quite possibly the finest natural sniper talent anyone at the facility had ever encountered. The next morning brought the official notification Morrison had been expecting but dreading. Captain Hayes had approved Sarah's transfer to the Navy SEAL sniper program, effective immediately. The orders came directly from Special Operations Command, with a personal note from General Patterson commending the training facility's role in developing such exceptional talent. Morrison found Sarah on the rifle range, conducting her usual pre-dawn practice session. She was working through precision drills at various distances, her movements economical and purposeful, each shot placed exactly where she intended. "Martinez!" Morrison called out as he approached. Sarah immediately came to attention. "Yes, sir." Morrison studied her face, looking for signs of smugness or triumph, but finding only the same quiet professionalism she had displayed from the beginning. Despite everything that had happened, despite his behavior toward her, she showed him the same respect she would give any superior officer. "I owe you an apology," Morrison said finally. "I judged you based on assumptions and prejudices that had nothing to do with your actual abilities. You've proven yourself to be an outstanding marksman and a credit to this program." Sarah's expression remained neutral. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Morrison nodded, understanding that her measured response was more generous than his behavior had warranted. "You're being transferred to Advanced SEAL sniper training. It's an opportunity most people spend their entire careers working toward. You've earned it in less than 2 months." "I won't let the program down, sir," Sarah replied. As Morrison watched her return to her practice, he reflected on the lessons of the past 8 weeks. Sarah's success hadn't just challenged his assumptions about women in combat roles. It had forced him to confront the ways his own prejudices had limited his ability to recognize and develop talent that didn't fit his preconceived notions. 3 months later, Sarah graduated from Navy SEAL Sniper School at the top of her class, setting new course records and earning the respect of instructors who had initially questioned whether she belonged there. Her success opened doors for other women seeking to serve in special operations roles and sparked conversations throughout the military about capability, opportunity, and the importance of judging people by their performance rather than their appearance. Colonel Morrison remained at the Naval Special Warfare Command, but his approach to training recruits had fundamentally changed. He began looking beyond physical stereotypes and superficial impressions, focusing instead on identifying and nurturing the raw talent that could emerge from unexpected sources. Years later, when Morrison was asked about the most important lesson of his military career, he would always mention the morning a small farm girl from Texas taught him that true strength couldn't be measured by size, gender, or background, but only by the courage to pursue excellence despite every obstacle placed in the way. Sarah Martinez went on to serve with distinction in special operations units around the world. Her marksmanship skills saving countless lives, and her pioneering service inspiring a generation of women to pursue their own dreams of military service. But she never forgot the colonel who mocked her on that first day, not out of resentment, but out of gratitude for the motivation his doubts had provided. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others right, but from proving them wrong with such grace and excellence that they thank you for the lesson.